Let's lead and live
Hello,
in a
I
whole
am
new
so happy
way.
that you're all here. Let's start with one good thing. So, why did we start there? Because when we think about something good, it actually makes our brain, it helps it so it's easier to listen. It helps us so we can make better decisions. So, thinking something good doesn't just feel good, it actually helps us think better. The key is that it has to be something real. It can't be something fake. It can't be toxic positivity. It's got to be something real. And what's really exciting to me about the research of this is that it doesn't just happen when you think about your one good thing. It happens when you hear other people talk about theirs too. And here's what I can promise you. If you stick around to the end, and I hope you do, because I don't know why in the world you would leave a second early, you will walk away with knowing how to use the unstressing method. A really simple 3-step method to have less stress and more joy. Many of you know that I recently completed a national research study on stress and joy. So, my team and I looked at the American workforce to figure out what is happening. What is happening right now with the intersection between stress and joy? And what we found is that there is no question that there's a hard truth. And the hard truth is that over 80% of working Americans are experiencing stress. And not just stress once a month or once a week, but regularly experiencing stress. But the good news is that even though stress is undermining success, joy is part of the solution. Joy isn't just a feel good emotion. Joy is actually a performance driver. It's a performance lever. So that's what we're going to talk about today is how can we have a little bit less stress and a little bit more joy. All right, so let's get into the unstressing method because you are going to walk away with a tool that you can use, a tool that you can share with your workplaces, and a tool that you can use with your families. We're going to start with step number 1. We've got to be able to see our stress differently if we're going to do something about it. And it all starts with the stress ruler. So this simple stress ruler is something that you can use every day. And you can use it with your families, you can use it at work. What you're trying to do is get a really quick pulse check on how challenging is our stress right now. We've got to be able to understand what the baseline is. So as people start to shift, then we can recognize when they might need support. And we can recognize when we might need support. The goal is to get it all from your head and to get it all from your heart and get it onto paper. That's the first way where we can start seeing our stress. And then we can look at it through 2 different lenses, 2 really important lenses. The first one is whether or not that stressor is important. And I would invite you now to look at the ones you wrote down, however many you wrote down, and identify how many of those are important and how many of those are not important. It's worth remembering that everything can't be important. So when I do this work with individuals or when I do this work with teams, part of the goal is to figure out what does important mean to you. I just worked with a team last week where they identified what were the things that would elevate a stressor so that they were now considering it to be important. It was a state agency, so they had things like it had a budget impact, it impacted their service to frontline clients. You'll have your own list of how do you know if something is important. So you've got this differentiator now between how many of these are important to you versus not important to you. And when you do this at work, and I hope you do this with your team, it's not uncommon at all to realize that several of you on the team might have the same stressor, but you're identifying it differently. For some, it feels important. For others, it doesn't feel important. That's part of the value of using this is that it creates a conversation around what really is important. What should be the focus of our attention right now is probably a better way to say it. I had mentioned that I was going to help you see your stress through 2 different lenses. The first one was whether or not it was important. The second one is whether or not you have control. Do you have control over that stressor? So when you've done that, when you've decided which of these stressors are important to me, do I have control over them? Then you're able to create this map. And if you do this with a team, if you're in person, you can put it up on a wall. You can create the matrix and put it right up on a wall. If you're virtual or maybe you're a hybrid team, you can use Zoom or Teams and do it virtually. What it does is it gives you a really quick snapshot of where are we right now as a team? Where are we with the kinds of stress that we're feeling? And that takes us into step 2. Because once you've seen it, now we've got to sort it. We've got to figure out what is driving the stress that you're feeling. Because if we don't, the likelihood of us solving the real problem is pretty low. Most people don't understand that there are 5 kinds of work stress. There is not just one. And if you want to solve your stress, we've got to be able to sort it into these 5 categories first. So type number 1 is schedule. There is not enough time in the day to do everything you need to do. Even if you work through breaks, you work through lunch, you skip vacation, no matter what you do, there just isn't enough time. Schedule stress can also show up if you're in back-to-back-to-back meetings. That's what schedule stress looks like at work. The second type of stress is called suspense. Suspense stress is when you're waiting for something. You're anticipating something. You are in a spot of ambiguity. And until you have that information, your suspense stress goes up. The third type is social. Social stress is the stress of people. In an ideal world, the people around you are making your job easier. They're helping you get your work done. But that's not always the case. Sometimes the people around us actually cause stress for us. I work with lots of people every year. And when I work with people who love their job and I say, what do you love? What do you love about your job? The number one answer I get, the people. And when I go into organizations where things are tough and people do not like their jobs, and I say, tell me, what is it about your job that's so hard? Number one answer, people. So the people that we work with can either make or break our experience. Social stress is recognizing that. It's recognizing that when there's tension or when there's unresolved conflict, that creates a really challenging work environment. Social stress doesn't go away. I'm a certified mediator. I specialize in workplace conflict. And as someone who has sat through hundreds and hundreds of mediations at work, I can tell you, social stress doesn't go away on its own. We've got to figure out how to repair it and how to move forward. That takes us to number 4. The fourth kind of stress is sudden. Sudden stress is when something happens out of the ordinary, something unusual, something unannounced, and it requires you to do something. So that's the key about sudden stress, is that your attention has to change, or you've got to make a decision, you've got to take an action. Sudden stress requires something of you. You've either got to think about something or do something that was unexpected. That is sudden stress. What's really important to understand about sudden stress is that even though schedule stress was the most common in our research, sudden stress had the most negative impact. And that was true across gender. It was true across generation, across industry. Sudden stress created the most negative impact. So what that means is you've got to be on the lookout for it at work. Am I creating sudden stress for other people? Am I experiencing sudden stress? Am I really pay attention, because sudden stress has the most negative outcomes for us. And then the fifth type is system. And system stress is when the very workplace system that you're a part of causes you stress. So things like inequity, things like unfairness, power imbalances, those types of things that are about the actual system that you're working in. When you're experiencing system stress, there is no amount of self-care to get you through it. You cannot self-care your way out of a toxic work environment. This last one matters so much to me because in our research, what we found is that right now, this is not old data, this is 2026 data, that 25% of working Americans report feeling bullied at least once a week. That is startling. 25% of people say, I feel bullied at least once a week, and people experience bullying even more than once a week. If that's happening in your organization, you cannot self-care your way through that. You can't go to a yoga class or take a meditation retreat and undo what's happening in the system. So as teams, as leaders, as frontline contributors, we have got to understand, is system stress at play? Because if it is, we've got to address it. And unfortunately, there are times where if you are experiencing system stress and you have done everything that you know how to do, you have used every tool in your toolbox, there may come a time where you have to leave that position. There may come a time where the cost benefit analysis of what is it costing me to stay here is not worth what it's bringing me to be here. I shared, John and I were in an earlier webinar today where I shared that I was talking to a young woman who was describing that she was in her dream job. And she was talking all about her dream job. But then she started sharing how she was being treated by her manager, what the overall culture of the organization was. And I said, I got to tell you, that doesn't sound like a dream to me. That sounds like a nightmare. What you're describing feels like a nightmare to me. And then she just burst into tears because that's the thing about system stress. It is bigger than one person. It is the system in which we're operating. You can absolutely see that there can be stressors that start out as one type of stress and then they move into another. And sudden stress is a great example. If John and I are on the same team and John misses a deadline, and now I've got to scramble, I'm feeling sudden stress because I've got to make up for that. There might be some social stress that comes out of that because now there's tension in our relationship that we're going to have to talk about. So we've got these 5 types of stress. And why is this so important? Because if you do this on your own, and remember, right now, you probably only have a few Post-it notes because you haven't had the time to write down all of your stressors. But when you do, you're going to have a really quick visual of what's happening right now. Am I seeing a lot of 3s? Does that mean there's some work I need to do on relationships? Am I seeing a lot of 1s to know that there's something around scheduling that has to happen here? It gives you a super quick snapshot into what are the types of stress that are happening. So then you can know what to do about it. If we don't take the time to sort our stress into these categories, we are likely to apply a solution that isn't going to solve the problem. And just imagine if you try to solve system stress with anything other than a system solution, it's not going to work. If you try to solve social stress, but you're not actually dealing with the people, it's not going to work. So that's the key here, to figure out what is the type of stress so that we can actually apply the right solution. So let's look at step number 3. We've seen our stress. Now we've sorted it, which leaves us to our last step, which is to solve it. We've got to be able to figure out, how do we move forward? When I'm brought into organizations, it's usually not when things are going well. Though at some point in my life, I would love a career where I'm brought in when things are going well. Most of the time I'm brought in, it's when things aren't going as well as people would like. There is a team in conflict, or a team that's underperforming, or a team that just needs some support in really being the best team that they can be. And by the time I'm brought in, many times they're stuck. They're stuck. They don't know what to do. They don't have a next step. And so they just feel frozen. That's where step 3 comes in. Because wherever your stressor lands on that matrix, you're going to have a next step to consider. Because the goal of this whole thing isn't just to have less stress, though that's an incredible goal. Our goal is also to have more joy. It's both. And in our research, we found that there are three key drivers to joy at work. The first one is when you've got meaning, when there's meaning and purpose in what you're doing. The book Cheers to Monday is through the lens of work, but this is about life. These are the exact same skills outside of the office that they are inside of the office. So when we look at joy, it's meaning. Do I have purpose? The second driver of joy at work was mattering. Do I matter in the relationships I have at work? And not just because of what I contribute, not just because of the value that I bring, but do I matter because of who I am? I matter simply because I'm me. That's the second driver. And the third one is momentum. Do you see momentum in your progress? Are you able to look back and say, wow, things are different because this is somewhere I contributed? Or do you feel momentum in how you're learning and growing and developing? Those were the three drivers of joy at work. When we understand what the three drivers are, we also have to know what's going to get in the way. I would guess that all of us have done something to put a barrier up for other people to feel joy at work. And not intentionally. I don't work with a lot of people who say, today is the day I'm going to be a joy crusher. Today is the day I want to make sure no one around me feels joy. And yet sometimes that's what happens. Let's look at what gets in the way. The fifth most common barrier to joy is when you feel isolated or disconnected. And we've known this for decades in the research that when you are in emotional pain, if you feel isolated or disconnected or ostracized, the part of your brain that lights up is the exact same part that lights up when you're in physical pain. It's why when people describe a challenging time at work, they might say things like, this really hurts, or I didn't know that I would feel this bad, or I didn't know it would be this painful. They use words that describe pain because that's the part of their brain that's registering it. So we've got to be mindful of isolation and disconnection in the workplace. The fourth biggest one is around technology. When you've got technology problems that disrupt your day, that was the fourth. Third is when there's sudden changes. Remember how we talked about sudden stress has the most negative outcomes, the most negative impact? This is where it shows up with joy as well. It's the third leading barrier of what gets in the way. The second one is when you feel underappreciated. I was working with a leader recently who said, do I really need to tell adults how much I appreciate them? Do I really have to come to work and tell people? Well, no, you don't. But you're not going to create a culture where people want to stay because appreciation matters. It matters so much. So now let's look at the number one. And I'm curious if anyone has any guesses. What do you think is the number one situation at work that prevents us from feeling joy at least once a week or more? So the number one barrier to joy, according to American workers earlier this year, was overwhelming workload, when it's just more work than you can handle. I work a lot with the public sector, and I'm working with a lot of teams who have been asked to do more with less for so long now that they're just feeling exhausted. And then there's more budget challenges, and then there's more budget cuts. And it's actually why we're doing this webinar now. When I announced that there was a training this morning, I got dozens of emails and DMs on LinkedIn saying, I wish I could go, but my agency doesn't have a training budget. Or I wish I could go, but the funding got pulled. I do not believe that money should stand in the way of us knowing how to have less stress and more joy. So all the tools that we're sharing, you're going to have them. You don't have to read the book, though I hope you do. But you don't have to. You don't have to read the book to get the framework. We're going to dive deeper in it. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of good stuff in there, but you're going to leave here with what you need to share this resource with whoever in your life would benefit from it. So overwhelming workload, we've got to figure out if that's happening. So that leads us to, let's figure out for each of these quadrants, what does it mean? Because you now have your matrix. You've got your stressors on each one of them. If you've got a stressor in the bottom left, it's about acknowledging it and moving on. If a stressor is not important, if it's out of your control, it's acknowledging it and moving on. When I first created the unstressing method, I didn't have an action for those that were in the unimportant column. My thinking was, if it's not important, then let's not spend any time on it. But I kept hearing in trainings and workshops, people would say, it's in quadrant 3, so why am I still bothered? Or this was in quadrant 3, why is it still annoying me? So I went back to the research and learned just how much our brains despise open loops. If I say to you, don't think about a purple elephant, you're thinking about a purple elephant. That's what happens when we try to ignore our stressors. We try to pretend they're not there. If we acknowledge it, then we can move on. I can say, this stressor is not important to me. I don't have any control over it. I'm moving on. That little acknowledgement allows my brain to say, okay, turn the switch off. We're moving ahead. If you've got a stressor in the bottom right, then it's about accepting it without fixing it. And here's what that means. Quadrant 4 is just because you can, doesn't mean you should. I will spend a lot of time in quadrant 4 if I'm not careful. I will work on a slide deck for 8 hours that no one's going to look at twice. Is it important? No. Do I have control over it? Yeah. So if you've got something in quadrant 4, it's about accepting it without fixing it. That's the difference. Then we head up to quadrant 1. So this is where you have got a stressor that it is important to you, but you don't have control over it. This is where we ask for help. And asking for help is brave. Accepting help is even braver. If you've got a stressor in quadrant 1, you've got to consider, who can I ask for help? And one of two things will happen. One, there is going to be somebody. There's someone you can call. There's someone you can reach out to. Option 2, it's a stressor and there isn't anyone that can help. It's out of the control of everyone that you know. Then in that case, it's about, what support do I need to move forward? What support do I need to recognize that there isn't anything I can do about this? There isn't anything that anyone I know can do about this. How do I move forward with that realization? That's quadrant 1. But hopefully you'll find yourself with stressors in quadrant 1 where there are people who can help. Maybe you can't shift a deadline, but your boss can. Maybe you are now under a hiring freeze, but HR knows how to do the exemption process for a critical role. Maybe there will be times where you've got something in quadrant 1 where there is someone to go to. And that leaves us then with quadrant 2, because this is the quadrant of action. You have control over it. It's important to you. So by definition, there's an action that you can take. This is where you want to focus your time and energy. This is normally when people say to me, I don't have either one of those things. I don't have any time. I don't have any energy. But here's what I promise you. If you start using this method, if you start using this matrix, you are going to free up some time. You're going to free up some energy, because you're no longer going to be using it the way you are right now in those other 3 quadrants. You're going to find a reserve of time and energy that you can actually hone in and work on quadrant 2. I hope you noticed at the very middle of the unstressing matrix is a heart. And the heart is there because, to me, it represents compassion. Compassion for ourselves, compassion for other people, because the only way to do this work is to do it with compassion. If you try to use the unstressing method with shame or blame or guilt or judgment, it doesn't work because it's actually going to increase stress. It's going to decrease joy because we have to be rooted in compassion. The reason why that matters is that there are 4 levels of connection. And at the very bottom is what researchers identify as pity. When we feel sorry for somebody, that's pity. It doesn't drive connection and it doesn't drive trust. We can move up one and then we're in sympathy. We're feeling for someone, but there's still a disconnect. There's still a separation between you and between me. You'll notice with empathy, now we've crossed over into the tipping point. Now we do have connection. However, according to research from Harvard, there's one more level of connection. It doesn't stop with empathy. It doesn't stop with understanding what someone's feeling or feeling along with someone. The highest level of connection is compassion. Compassion doesn't just say, John, I'm really sorry to hear you're stressed at work. That's really hard. I'm sorry. That must be really challenging. Compassion says, what are we going to do about it? Compassion says, let's schedule some time. I want to sit down with you and I want to figure out what we're going to do differently. That's compassion. It's taking the empathy and it's moving it into. I wanted to end with just a really short story of how these 4 things showed up in my life in a way that it's almost as if the ladder of connection was made for this story. When I was 12, I started planning my 13th birthday party. I could not wait to turn 13. My mom and dad are very reasonable people, and their very reasonable idea of what a birthday party would look like didn't match my idea. So for a year, I babysat, I mowed lawns, I washed cars, I did all the things to build a budget for this birthday party. And leading up to the birthday party, my brother kept saying, no one's going to come to this thing. You're an absolute dork. Why are you here? Why are you planning this party? And what happened the day of the party, he was still saying that. My whole family's outside. We're decorating. My brother's saying, you're a dork. No one's going to come. The party was supposed to start at 1 o'clock. 1 o'clock comes and goes. 1:15, 1:30. By 1:30, it was clear that this was not good. So I pick up my phone, I call who I thought was my best friend at the time, and all of my friends are in the background. Nobody was coming. So I go running outside, I throw myself on the grass, and I cry in the way that only a 13-year-old girl can cry. And in just a few minutes, my 5 cousins showed up on their bicycles, like the smallest, mightiest little cavalry in the world. Because what I didn't know is while I was outside crying, my brother had called my cousins and said, you got to get over here. You got to get over here fast. And I will tell you, we had a party. It was so good that my mom and dad, we turned it into a sleepover. They set up a tent. We had cake in the tent the next morning. And you guys were feeling so bad for me that cake in a tent, take it, like whatever you need, because your heart is breaking. So I share this with you because let's look at what my brother could have done. My brother could have pitied me. He could have said, oh, bless your heart, you're a dork. My brother could have felt sorry for me, and I would have felt disconnected. My brother could have shown empathy. And mind you, he was the star defensive tackle of a football team who had gone to state all 4 years. He had no idea what it was like to throw a party where nobody would come. But he knew what it felt like to be ashamed, to feel embarrassed, to be sad, to be devastated. So my brother could have shown empathy and I would have felt connected. But he went a step further. When he picked up the phone and said, good Lord, get over here now, that was compassion. And I promise you, he was not reading the Harvard Business Review. He was doing what felt intuitive to him. As humans, we are wired for compassion. We are wired for self-compassion. But when stress goes up and joy goes down, our ability for compassion goes down with it. So that is my hope for you, That was my hope in writing the book, is that stress thrives in isolation and relief is going to come through connection. That's the big takeaway. If you're ready to reclaim your time, energy, and the joy you were meant for, take a deep breath and join me. Order my new book, Cheers to Monday, the surprisingly simple strategy to lead and live with less stress and more joy, everywhere books are sold. If you've got a question, shoot me an email, amy@amyleneker.com. Less stress, more joy, zero toxic positivity. That's the Joyful Rebellion.
Raise a glass, it's cheers to Monday.